Hello YouTube, this is Gary Shields for Gary Shields Photography. This is the first in a new series of videos I'm hoping to do, in which I'll be going through my retouching process in Lightroom, and perhaps I'll show you some Photoshop as well in future videos. Today we're going to start off with this picture, which needs quite a bit of work. I selected this photo because it's not perfect. There are some problems with motion blur and colour that we'll be addressing in this video. As you can see, it's quite flat and quite lifeless, and there's a few other things that will need to be addressed as well. When you shoot a RAW plus JPEG on your camera, you'll often find the JPEG looks a lot better, and that's because of the in-camera processing that your camera is actually doing to enhance the colours, to enhance the contrast, while the RAW file will often come out looking quite flat and dull like this. However, when you develop those RAW files yourself in a tool such as Lightroom, you can often get better results than the camera achieves with its JPEG processing. In fact, that should be your minimum aim, is to outdo the JPEG that your camera creates. So there's a few things I do when I come into Lightroom and start on a new image. You'll often find that people will go through these sliders maybe one by one, changing them from top to bottom, and that's their workflow and that works for them. I jump around a little bit, and I start personally with the crop, because there's no point in taking into account areas of the image you're not going to use. So this composition, okay, the girl is right in the center of the frame and she's awkwardly cut off at the bottom. We've lost some fingers. It's not ideal. So first of all, let's get the crop right. Now I personally like to constrain my aspect ratio. So instead of free-forming, I like to say, well, this is going to be printed to a 6x4 image maybe, and that way I'm constrained. Or a 7x5, another common photo format. For this one I'm going to use 16:9 because it'll work on the YouTube video. And here we go. Now, the obvious thing to do here would be to put the girl with the rule of thirds, something like that. But this isn't going to work, and you'll see why. I personally think she is more nicely placed in the frame. I also like the fact that by cropping in, the background appears more blurred. It's not, but of course the blur that you do have has now been enhanced. You've essentially zoomed into it. So I like the crop, I like the positioning of the girl, but this is still awkward. We've cut her hand off, and we can do better than that. So when you have an image like this, where do you crop? Do you crop at the elbow? It's better, but it's not ideal. In fact, I like to crop something like that, almost midway through the upper part of the arm. Now in this particular case, we're going to be cropping out a lot of the image. This is not ideal, and it would have been better to have composed this photo properly in the first place, or composed it in this way in the first place. But for the purposes of this example, it's perfectly fine, and that works for me. And also, when you're shooting with high resolution cameras, this is, I don't know, maybe 24 megapixels, something like that. When you're shooting high megapixel cameras, 24 megapixel, 32, 50, you can afford to crop in a long way and still get usable images out, depending on what you're going to be using them for. This will probably print quite nicely at 6x4. It's certainly more than usable on the web. I have a high resolution screen here, and that photo is plenty big enough for publishing in most places on the web, even your social media profile. So this works for me for the time being. Now this leaves us with our next problem, which is the flat, lifeless look of the image. Everything's a little bit too dull, a little bit too dark, and that's what we're going to address next. And we come up here to the histogram, and everything is on this left hand side here. Not only is it on the left hand side, but it's quite narrow. Okay, so this entire histogram window represents the range of luminance values that we could take advantage of, but we've constrained ourselves to using this narrow portion here. So the first task is to move this histogram into the middle. We'll come back into the develop module, and we move this en masse by shifting the exposure. So this brightens the image. Remember, whites over here on the right and your blacks over here on your left. This portion represents the shadows, this portion represents the highlights. So we'll bring this until our histogram is roughly centered. That's okay. Now the reason it looks too bright, and it will look too bright and washed out, is because of the lack of contrast. That's because of this blank area here and this almost blank area here. Once we add the contrast, this will look correct, and we'll demonstrate that now by increasing the contrast. And watch the histogram. It is spreading out. We can go quite a long way with this. In fact, we can go all the way with that, and that's just fine. But I'm actually going to do this another way. I'm going to bring this back to 0 for the time being, and we're going to work on our white and black point. So what I recommend you do is hold your Alt or Option key, and you want to drag until you start to see things appearing. Now, even at 0, we've got some areas here which are blown out, and that's what this overlay view is telling you, that the areas that are in white are blown out. There's no more information in there to be seen. So you just want to hit that just until it starts to happen, and that'll be fine. Same with the blacks. This time we go to the left until we start to see things clipping in the blacks. And this is the girl's hair here. I'll bring that down to about there. And you can see what that's done is move the histogram back to the left. So now we have to counteract that by actually increasing the exposure a little bit more. And now we can add our contrast. And you see everything starts to flatten out and expand. Okay, there we go. And we can probably afford to bring down our highlights. Okay, that's not having the desired effect. What I'm trying to do here is actually darken this area. So we'll do this another way. We will decrease the exposure to about there, which actually is probably recentering the histogram anyway. I'd probably gone a little bit too far with it earlier on. Okay, that's about right. The next biggest problem I have with this image is that the light is coming in from the right. You can tell by the rim here that's happening on the girl's head and on her nose. And we've started to get some flaring coming in from the right, as represented by this milky, washed out area here. So I'm going to counteract that by bringing in a graduated filter. I'll click on there, and we'll drag this on, something like that. Click Effect to reset it. And so the back line represents where this graduation is going to start. The front line represents where it's going to end. And of course the distance between them can be altered. In fact, if I change this, you'll see that in action. So if you get the lines very close together, you get an almost hard line. We want this to be nice and soft so that it's not immediately noticeable. Rotate this around to match the angle of the girl, bring her in here. And of course we want to darken the area behind the filter. Something like that. Now, one thing I find when I'm working in Lightroom is that I tend to go too far with the sliders. I can go to, in this case, minus 33 or minus 0.5. And if I walk away from my PC and come back in 15 minutes, guarantee I will think, I went too far. So what I always urge people to do is go as far as they think they need to, or go as far as they want to, and then back it off slightly. Because you're always going to go too far. It's everybody does it. So always back it off, or walk away from your computer and come back to it and have another look later on. So there we go. That's gotten rid of that area on the left hand side, which was just too bright for me. And now we're getting somewhere. I'll close out the adjustment brush. And we're looking pretty good. Now, down in the present section, we have these three sliders here, which are primarily stylistic. For example, clarity. If you go all the way to the right, you get a very crispy, crunchy, stylized, almost stamp type image. It increased the micro contrast and has caused the image to become a little bit desaturated in some places more than others. Now this might be the exact look you're going for. If you take the clarity all the way down, you get a kind of watercolor effect where everything just bleeds into each other. Again, your choice, you might decide that's the one for you. In this particular case, I'm trying to keep quite a natural looking image, and so I'm going to leave it 0. Works for me as is. Now we're still lacking a little bit of contrast, I think, particularly in this area here. We have to come back and address that. I think we can actually address some of that by increasing the vibrance to bring out those greens a little bit more. And at the same time, this will bring out some of the colours, the purples and the pinks and a little bit of orange in the girl's hair. So that's about 25. It's not a huge difference, but it is a difference. There we go. Now we skipped 2 slides early on, highlights and shadows. What I'd like to do is raise the shadows to bring out some of the details in the girl's hair here, particularly this area and this area. And we'll move these up until we just get a little bit back of what we lost, and that's looking pretty good. 38, okay. And you'll notice, yes, we've jumped around the sliders a little bit, but what we haven't done is something I also often see done on YouTube retouching videos, and that is particularly tutorials where they come in and they will go, let's have a look at that, let's have a look at that, let's have a look at that, let's have a look at that. And that method doesn't work for me. I like to know what I'm trying to do and then know how to do it, rather than simply coming in swinging sliders from left to right. Do whatever works for you, but I do advise learning what each of these sliders do if you don't already know, and knowing how to control them. Yes, you can get great results through trial and error, but for me, I find that I get more pleasing results when I know what I'm trying to do with the image, and it also means I can process my images faster if I'm not moving sliders left to right, moving the wrong sliders in the wrong direction. Sometimes I can take an image, come in here, move 2 or 3 sliders very, very quickly, and I'm done. So take the time to learn what each of these do, and I think it will save you time in the long run. Now this isn't my image. I didn't take this, and there is a problem with it, and that is this motion blur here in the arm. As this photo was taken, it's quite clear the girl's arm was in motion, and we've got this kind of ghosting effect. And you see this purple and blue fringing along the arm here. We can do something about that in Lightroom. It almost looks like chromatic aberration. It's not a perfect image, but it's the kind of image that many people will take. You know, very few people can come and take absolutely perfect images, and many of us, particularly when you're just taking snapshots, have to work with what you've got. So I'm actually going to skip ahead a little bit, and we're going to come back down here, to the lens correction section. Something I should have done at the very beginning, actually, and I skipped this, is enable profile corrections. When I do that, you can see the left-hand side of the image lightens up again, and that's because it's removing the vignette introduced by this particular lens that was used to take the photograph. Now, it's not too bad in this particular case, it's just primarily the top left. I should have done this first. Perhaps I should have done this after I'd done the crop. I probably shouldn't be doing it at this stage, so apologies, but it's okay, we're going to get away with that. We can actually fix it by coming to our graduated filter that we created earlier and just bringing it down a little bit more, and that essentially counteracts that effect. I'm going to bring this back. In fact, no, do you know what? We'll leave that where it is and we'll crack on with where we were. So what I wanted to show you was the arm up here. If you remove chromatic aberrations, it has no effect. Chromatic aberrations are this essentially. You'll notice in high contrast areas of pictures, particularly around edges, quite often you'll get purple and green fringing caused by the diffraction of the light within the lens. This looks very similar, and we can actually use this feature to do something about it. Now in this case, you enable it and it does nothing. If you come over here to manual and you increase the amount of defringing, you should get to about 10 and it will disappear. Yeah, there it goes. 8, 9. Okay, and when we go right in, we've still got some blue fringing, and we can get rid of that as well. We come down here to the purple hue sliders, and we move this left one left. We have to find the balance. We can also potentially move this green hue slider to the right. Okay, and that's almost gotten rid of it. Maybe increase the defringe amount a little bit more. Yeah, that's just about done it. When we zoom out, that will be almost unnoticeable. We've still got the motion blur. We can't get rid of that, but at least we can detract the viewer's eye from it by removing that purple fringing that we had. So if I turn this off, those before and those after, it's not perfect, but it's better. And this section here, the manual defringe section and the lens corrections, is not something I often see covered in Lightroom tutorials. So just a little tip, your mileage may well vary. You're going to get better results than this most often, particularly when you spend the time getting these exactly where they need to be. So that'll do. So this image is nearly there. There's only so much I want to do with it. We're not going to go into split toning today, or the HSL or black and white options that we have. I'm not going to cover the tone curve. We'll do those in later videos that whether that the photo requires the use of these. These are often used more stylistically if you want to create a particular look or feel for a particular image. In this particular case, I'm going for a natural look. So we're going to leave these out for today, and we're going to immediately get on to the detail section. So we're going to zoom right in for this next part. Get some nice areas, excuse me, like this. So we get a good mixture of the skin and the hair. Now, Lightroom by default actually applies 25 sharpening. If you take that back down to 0, you'll notice the skin looks actually a little bit smoother. What this is doing is sharpening areas that don't need to be sharpened. Generally, it's edges that need to be sharpened up. People's skin doesn't need sharpening, because what you end up doing is introducing grain or noise, or you end up sharpening their imperfections, and they won't thank you for that. So I'm going to leave it on 25, which is the default, but if I hold Alt and then move masking, a strange thing starts to happen. Now if you look on the right hand side in the thumbnail view, you can pretty much see the outline of the girl's face. And as we move the masking more and more, you see now the white areas represent the edges that are going to be sharpened, the black areas are not going to be sharpened. And that's what we want. We just want to sharpen the edges of things. So we have to find the balance. I'll come off this now. We have to find the balance between sharpening the edge of the nose, maybe the eyelashes, the earring, some of the textures, and not sharpening the skin. So this can take a few tries, but if you come this way, more masking. Now we should be sharpening the edges of things. That'll work quite nicely at 80. There we are. And now when you move the sharpening slider, let's go all the way to 100. You see the skin isn't being sharpened, it's the edges of things that are being sharpened. Clearly that's far too much, but it's just demonstration. We'll knock this back down. I'm looking at the eyelashes and the hair. Now we'll leave it around 30 for now. Okay. And then you've got noise reduction. Now if I take the colour noise reduction down from its default of 25, I don't know if you'll see this on the YouTube video, but it introduces very strange, odd pixels of colour. So there's some pink here, magenta, magenta, magenta. There's some blue, and that's chrominance noise or colour noise. And I personally find, just go up to 100. I haven't yet come across a scenario whereby taking the colour noise reduction up to 100 does anything negative. It's very good. I'm sure there are times where you need to back it off. I personally haven't come across them, so straight up to 100. The luminance noise reduction you need to be more careful with, because if you take this up to 100, a big blurry mess. That looks like the worst retouching job you're ever going to see. And you see it quite often, whereby somebody wants to have perfectly smooth skin and they end up coming out with something like this instead. It's way, way, way too much. Everything's become milky and overdone. So let's take it down to 20. And what we're aiming to do here is to reduce some of the grain that's in the image. This blocky sort of thing that's going on, but without removing detail. And that's why we have a slider. So I personally like to look at details like hair. Once the details are there, like these small hairs start to disappear, you've gone too far. So let's see how far we can go without losing detail. We're getting there now. Okay, I'm looking at this hair here, which has almost disappeared. So let's back it off slightly. And that will do. That's probably about as far as we can go. If we turn that entire section off, there's a real marked difference between. So this is straight out of camera, no sharpening and no noise reduction. With it on, I think we've made a big difference. So that's one I always recommend spending some time on getting right. And that is pretty much our finished picture. I am going to do one more thing. This probably doesn't need to be done, but by way of demonstration, I'll just show you anyway, something that I find myself doing on quite a lot of pictures, and that's taking an adjustment brush, full 100 feather, which is the, I'm sure you know what a feathering is, it's the fade out of the brush, and 100 flow, and the flow is like opacity. It's like the opacity of the brush, except that each time you pass an area, the effect is cumulative. So if you set your flow to 50, and then you go over an area repeatedly, eventually that area will be as if you went over it once, a flow 100. In this particular case, flow 100 is fine for me. Automask is on, and with automask on, it should conform to the edges it finds, and that's fine. I didn't want to do it on the arm, so we will get rid of that. Start again. What I actually wanted to do is demonstrate how adding light to a subject's face can help. So I'm going to take this up way too far, 2 stops of exposure, and we're going to add some light on her face. And we don't have to be perfect. We just go into the hair a little bit, for reasons that will become clear in a moment. Come down here to the neck. Okay, so it's not a great job. Switch to erase, smaller brush and erase some of these areas just around the outline, because creating halos around people is one of my pet hates. And what we've done is we've brightened her face. Clearly we've gone too far. I did that for demonstration so that you could see where we were drawing. You can also do the same thing by turning on the mask overlay. If we take this back down to 0, that's where we started out. What I wanted to do is just add, I don't know, a third of a stop maybe of light. It just adds that extra focal point. In a portrait shot such as this, the girl is the focus of the image, and she needs to be quite brightly lit, and this isn't ideal. Her face is actually somewhat in shadow, but by just increasing the exposure in that area, it helps draw the viewer's eye to the face, which presumably is where you want it to be. And we are pretty much done. It's not a perfect job, it's not a perfect picture, but I think you'll be surprised that when we go back to the beginning where we started, we've come an awful long way. From a flat, dull, quite poorly composed photograph to something that she might be happy to put on her Facebook profile. It's just a demonstration of some of the tools that are available to us in Lightroom. And I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you find some of the things useful. The end product obviously isn't perfect, but it's a big improvement from where it was. If you like this video, or if you want to give me some feedback, hit like, leave me some comments, and all I ask is that you subscribe for future videos, and I'll be back with more of these shortly. Thanks very much for watching. Bye. Shining in our eyes. I'm feeling fine in the corner of the sphere, unlocked by the rust we bleed that draws everybody here. Our faces grow